My grandmother read her horoscope and talked to the conjure woman to make the right tea to solve a problem. Some of my friends find peace in yoga and Buddhist meditation. Other Black folk gather crystals, turn tarot cards, and set up ancestral altars, and go to church every Sunday. Or maybe they don't, because churches condemn their practices, but they have no problem with Jesus.
Wade in the water. Wade in the water, children. Wade in the water. God's gonna trouble the water.
Welcome to Diverse Devotions, Black Belief Across Boundaries, where we wade into the waters of religious multiplicity, Black faith, and spiritual journeys. Discover what happens when Black spirituality breaks the rules of how being religious is supposed to work. I'm Monica A. Coleman, writer, university professor, ordained clergy person, and initiated Iyala Orisha. In Diverse Devotions, I'll lead you through a tapestry of captivating narratives and thought-provoking dialogues. We'll hear the spiritual journeys of Black folk who practice more than one religion. We'll also hear from individuals whose acceptance of different religions emanates from an understanding of laws of nature and universal spiritual principles. From the freedom of religious multiplicity to the personal journeys of transformation, each episode offers enlightening perspectives that expand the boundaries of Black belief. So, if you're a seeker hungry for knowledge, religiously devout, an educator curious to understand, or simply intrigued by spirituality's rich diversity, follow and like Diverse Devotions. Be a part of this journey, because at the heart of these stories, you'll find the spirit of freedom. Well, I am excited to welcome to the podcast today Will Coleman, Ph.D. To our knowledge, there's no relation, but we could be wrong. So I am glad to welcome my colleague, my senior colleague, my big brother and friend, Will Coleman. Let me tell you a little bit about him before we get into what I know will be an engaging conversation. Will Coleman is a theologian and teacher of biblical spirituality. He was born and grew up in Memphis, Tennessee. He received degrees from Rhodes College and Columbia Theological Seminary before earning his doctorate at the Graduate Theological Union in Berkeley, California, where he concentrated in philosophical and systematic theology, philosophy of religion, and interpretation theory. He continues to teach and tutor individuals and groups in a variety of contexts in the areas of theology and biblical spirituality, and he does this in English, Hebrew, Greek, and Latin. Dr. Coleman is happily retired. He is Associate Professor Emeritus of Theology and World Religions at the Interdenominational Theological Center. He has also taught and is retired from teaching at the Holmes Institute, the Johnnie Colman Theological Seminary, and he is honorably retired minister of the Presbyterian Church, U.S.A. I first encountered Will Coleman, and you may know him from his book, Tribal Talk, Black Theology, Hermeneutics, and African/American Ways of Telling the Story. And I'm glad to have you on the podcast today.
I'm excited to be here. And, I do claim us as cousins in some sense. We just had to verify it with DNA. But as far as our tradition, if we name it, we claim it. So it is good to be here with you today and to have this fun and exciting conversation. So I'm here at your service. Let's do it.
Well, I'm going to ask the big question first. Tell me about how your current spirituality and how you got there. Like, is what you name as your current spirituality how you were raised? Did you evolve to it? What are you now religiously, and how did you get here?
That's a good question. I don't have a name for it anymore. I guess I've retired labels as well. I will say that, as you indicated, I grew up in Memphis, Tennessee, and I grew up in a family, an extended family, that had religious orientations as Pentecostal or sanctified, my parents most immediately, but they had also been Baptists and Methodists, and my grandparents were also primarily Baptist and Methodist, as well as an extended family of relatives and ancestors, persons who are not religious as such. So I grew up in an environment also that I would say, being in Memphis, Tennessee, where quote unquote the culture of Hoodoo was very strong, where faith healing was very strong, speaking in tongues. A lot of things that I now recognize as African retentions were prevalent very much in my own immediate family of origin. I always had a family, and still do, that was supportive, therefore, of not being tied to one specific religious tradition. We did go to church, but we had others who did not. And also not being bound by a specific, say, denominational and or Christian only orientation. So I always had that as the foundation. In my own journey, I would say that I made a pilgrimage from, personally speaking, non-Christian slash probably agnostic as a little child, to gradually coming into the influence of the more consciously of the Pentecostal church, sanctified church as we called it then, to being educated at a Presbyterian related college, where I also came under the sway and later on influence of the Presbyterian Reformed tradition, became a Presbyterian minister, as I had been a Pentecostal minister. I never denounced any of that. I always kept in my own way assimilating, because I had a quest for knowledge. Early on, I studied philosophy. I mean, as young as 10, I was reading mythology. I just had this avid appetite for knowledge and for spirituality, philosophy, then religion. After finishing, I would say, my Master of Divinity degree, I became introduced to and interested in spiritual traditions like mystic masonry, Rosicrucianism, quote unquote magic. And for a period of 3 solid years between my seminary degree and my graduate degree program, I was immersed in what you could call, I guess, esoteric studies. When I
Now,
got
can I
to
ask you, how did you encounter these? Because a lot of people go through their lives, in sanctified churches and
yeah,
Presbyterian churches and don't just trip onto, right, esoteric studies. So can you tell us
I
how
looked for them.
you've
I
got,
know
oh, okay, you were looking. All right.
I would say too that I looked for them, and then I had intuitions about them. There were different moments when I would almost have a foreshadowing experience. Let me give the earliest example of being 5 years old, going to school, uh, watching the teacher write the alphabets on the board, and writing my alphabets in my tablet, both backwards and from left to right, being chastised about it. But I realized later on that was my beginning of knowledge, the quest for knowledge in Hebrew, and probably even Ifa, way ahead of the time. So too, I remember reading the Iliad and the Odyssey just on a hunch. I was in the 5th grade. I left the lunchroom. Something guided me I still see my little hand. It guided me to the library. I picked up both copies of the Iliad and Odyssey. I spent at least, it seemed like it was weekend, but I spent probably a week reading it and understanding it. It was not a part of any assignment I had. So I had many moments. These are just 2 examples of foreshadowings of things that I would either do later and or become a part of later on. And most often it would happen as a kind of a hunch, a flash, and then I would do due diligence to confirm that. Same thing with college, etc. So because, back to the other point, my parents never ever had strictures upon me in terms of my quest for knowledge. There were other things I encountered in more the dogmatic settings of institutions, but not from my family. So I was always free and supported in my inquisitiveness about knowledge. I would say that first and foremost. And along with that, I became increasingly interested in mythology, philosophy, religion, spirituality. Oh,
So you're in this time period between your MDiv, where you went to a Presbyterian school, you're in the Presbyterian church, and your doctorate, and you're learning all these esoteric, magical arts, shall we call them?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. Arts and sciences, I would say. That was interesting as well. I had just finished my MDiv degree. In a way, I was frustrated with the more analytical studies. And I asked a friend who I had recently met if they knew of any other type of study that I could engage in. And they suggested that I should study the tarot cards. So I thought, I'd never heard of that before. I had seen reference to the word Kabbalah in some of the writings of Carl Jung, but I didn't really understand that at all either. So one day I went to a bookstore, a metaphysical bookstore in Atlanta, and as soon as I walked through the door, I was drawn to a particular tarot deck called the Voyager Tarot. And I began to work and play with it per the suggestions of the creator of that deck. And behind that, I began then to study more about specifically Kabbalah as a magical system and as a tradition that, of course, was hundreds and thousands of years old. And that question took me deeper, 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 quote unquote, into the rabbit hole. But it also converged and it gave me the kind of esoteric meditative balance that I was seeking alongside my training as, quote unquote, by this time, a Presbyterian minister. And I was working at the time at the national office of the Presbyterian Church, in fact. But I was almost the pattern of, by day, I was doing my particular job as a staff associate for economic justice for them. And by night, I was doing my esoteric studies. And that flowed right on into the same or similar pattern when I began to pursue graduate studies. As I was doing the standard rubrics and graduate school by day, but by night I was studying African traditional spirituality. I was enhancing my studies of tarot and magic, etc. And they were converging in their own way. There was a gestalt taking place. They were converging. And also, so much of what I studied was more like remembering. I know that sounds strange, but it's true. So I think at times I was studying things that either I and or my ancestors had studied before, and I was remembering and recalling it. Like yourself, I had this photographic mind, so I could take pictures of things I really wanted to remember, and I could create these scenarios, these holodecks in my mind about anything I wanted to retain. So this practice enhanced that, especially the use of the imagination for retention and for information retrieval. So that made it easy and it made it fun. Now, don't get me wrong. There was some ballet moments too. We know that in the process. But all in all, I was always sustained by a knowing, gnosis. I was always sustained by a knowing that what I was pursuing was right for me. And as I said, I go back to my family. They didn't always know the details, but I grew up in an environment where multi-spiritual and even non-spiritual orientations were okay, because in my family, we would always say, but the matriarch set this up, family first. And no matter what else you're doing, it's family first. So that's really the core spirituality, in a way of speaking. Certainly the core culture.
Okay, so you're studying all these things, and many people study things but don't adopt them as their own, right? So, how did you go from I want to know more to this feels right for me, or this is something I want to be a part of, not just a student of?
Yeah, I think it's because this will touch upon something else we might discuss later on. Even though dualism and bifurcated thinking was introduced to me, I never accepted that. I always believed that if I wanted to acquire something that was going to enhance myself, not harm anybody else, then I should go for it. That it's meant for me to acquire this because it's coming to me in a particular way. And as I said earlier, especially when it comes to me as an intuition or a flash, and then there are the subsequent steps that I undergo to verify that intuition. So the assimilation is easier, has been, continues to be easier, if I don't have an internal conflict about it. And the reason I don't have an internal conflict about it, A, is coming to me, and B, as I become more acquainted with it, part of it seems to be recall, and then C, it makes my life overall balanced.
So what you haven't told us that I know, that I want to share, is you are adopting these various practices and knowledges, we'll say, but you also become a leader in them. So it wasn't like you were just Presbyterian, you're like a Presbyterian minister, right? You are
Right.
initiated into a couple traditions. Will you tell us, first of all, what you're initiated into and what you're a leader of,
Yes. So
and
um,
how you went from being like, this is cool, to I feel like I should be a leader in this, or I'm called to
yes,
be a leader.
that's a good question. My experience is that in doing what I felt guided to do initially as an intuition, and then pursuing it with diligence, that in due course I excelled in each of those. So um, the, at 10 years old, 14 years old, etc., as I studied mythology, mathematics, etc., then the more I study something, the more I also strive. I'm not in competition with anyone else per se, but the more I strive to accelerate in it. And that would speak for itself. The same thing with the seminary, from seminary to becoming not only a minister in the Presbyterian Church, but really working at one of the top offices of the national denomination as a newly made Presbyterian and straight out of seminary without even going through the due process. But I just excelled in everything that I did because the desire to know for me and the hunger to know gives the impetus, motivation, and energy to excel, to quote unquote stand out because you enjoy it. That's the key. You stand out because I enjoyed what I was learning about Presbyterianism. I enjoyed what I was learning about esoteric knowledge. And I didn't always talk about it publicly, but I also did not hide it if someone asked me. Because I would go back to my prior statement. I'm not conflicted about it. And therefore, I'm showing up as someone who's not conflicted about it. Now, sometimes there would be some tensions somewhere else, but not with me.
Right. So you are in also, so you mentioned the Presbyterian leadership part. I know you have
Oh, that's right. Oh, you asked another
initiation,
question.
right,
Yeah.
and a couple other
So
traditions.
yeah, so this is also interesting. When I began my studies in graduate school and became introduced to, let's say, Ifa, it did not come through Ifa itself. It came through a book by Henry Louis Gates, signifying monkey.
Monkey.
The first chapter of that book about Eshe Legbara, and of course literary criticism, was earmarked to my consciousness. And as I began to become interested in who this person was, become interested in West African spiritualities, especially West African Vodun, I began, and colleagues of mine out in Berkeley began to do research on the African retentions we could discover in African American church, African American spirituality, etc. And so I would say I spent a good decade doing research and writing about those topics. And then right after, or right at the point where Travel Talk was being published in 2000, I quote unquote coincidentally met who person would become my Oluwo, my initiator into Ifa. So I had been doing research for a while and not looking for initiation, but I met him right after the book was published and subsequently was initiated as a priest of first of ASU, then later on Ifa, the same year, 2000.
Now, can you tell us what that means too? I don't want to assume that our
Oluwo
listeners,
means the teacher initiation.
right, that
Yeah.
what it means to be initiated into a shoe and Ifa. What
Okay,
is that?
so yes, you go. You do a short form. You go to a person who's called quote unquote called Babala Ialao, father, mother of the mysteries. They do a reading that is very specific to the tradition of Ifa involving I want to say in short form, some implements that then refer to particular chapters and verses in the sacred text that's called the Odu Ifa, 256 proverbs, prescriptions, etc. And then they determine in that process which Orisha, or kind of like a guardian spirit, not exactly, but which Orisha came along with you to guide you in your path, along with your Ori. And the one that came up for me was Eshu. And in short form, let's say that's the spirit of communication, the spirit of opening paths, the spirit that is essential for all forms of thought and action, in short form. So I went through a process of essentially 3 nights and days of rituals, reflections, offerings before that third day. I was, in a way speaking, enthroned as a particular Bible oration of connected with that specific oration. Of course, as you know, that includes certain protocols for how you govern yourself, what you wear, what you do, what you don't do. So that's a short form of that.
And then Ifa.
Okay, that came later. So after having a period of time of further study, I went to the same Babalawo, and that's when he determined, in conversation, we determined that I should be initiated as a full-fledged priest of Ifa, which incorporates knowledge of the whole range of the tradition, protocol, rituals, prayers, etc. And so it would be comparable to, let's see if we do the difference between being a member of a church, being, let's say, a deacon or priest, deacon, priest, preacher, and becoming more like, almost like in between a priest of a particular preacher, minister, and or bishop. So these are the kind of the analogies that help people get a sense of what that is similar to. And in the case of just being initiated to the Orisha, you permanently know the work that pertains to that Orisha. If you become a priest of Ifa or Babalawo, then you are familiar with the entire tradition. That same year, 2000, later on in November, I was initiated into Haitian Vodou by Mambo in New York. I had not known her before. Again, this was through another connection. But what was significant, I guess what I'm trying to demonstrate is that sometimes, and it has often been the case for me, you have a flash of information, you do some research and study about the particular topic, and then at the right time for you, another manifestation appears, i.e. the opportunity to be initiated and continue your path, your spiritual path.
So you said earlier, and thank you so much for making sure we have that information. You said earlier that you were drawn to these traditions and that there's no conflict for you and that it gives you balance, right? Is there something that you've learned maybe about yourself more, or we know you learn more about the world, but does practicing these various traditions shine more light on who you are, or do you feel like it gives you another kind of, benefit for you personally?
Yes, in my own case, I would say that the various traditions, I didn't mention this too, but I also at one point, 2007, initiated into Taoism. So from my point of view, and I think this has always been there, and this is where a person's own temperament will speak to him or her. As I said earlier, if it works, then I use it. For me, that's the litmus test. Ultimately, does what you practice optimize your sense of well-being? And I also think that since I came from an African-American tradition of Hoodoo, which is eclectic, this was really just a continuation of it, or has been continuation. Give you 2 examples. When I wrote Tribal Talk, the first chapter is on the coming of the Vodun. So I'm looking at the relationship between West African Vodun and later on in the text, aspects of that in African American slave narratives. Well, that first chapter is dedicated to Vodun. On one occasion, after it was been published, and maybe 2 months later, my father, with an 8th grade education, called me and he said, "Son, I want to thank you for this book." And I said, "Why is that, Dad?" He said, "Because it gets better and better." And then he said this. He said, I read the first chapter. He said, "This is what we believed, but they made us ashamed of it, so we stopped talking about it." He said, "But this is our tradition." On a separate occasion, I went to Memphis for a speaking engagement and book signing. And my mother came there and she was sitting on the front row. And my mama was sanctified, prayer warrior, blah, 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 etc. And so I said, "Oh, man, I'm going to be a little bit taken aback by this first chapter once I start reading from it, right?"
Right.
Now, Doc, I read the first paragraph and gave my interpretation. My mama raised her hand up. She said, "Yes." She said, "That's what I practice." And I remember, yeah, Mom would go to church sometime. Dad went to church all the time. Mom would go to church sometime, but she also went down to Beale Street from time to time, and she'd get that little Florida water and
Right.
other little things, and then come back home. And here's the thing. This is the other thing. All of my life up to that point of writing the book, my parents and elders never talked about the culture of hoodoo. They never gave it a name. We tried to name it.
Right.
They just did it. They just did it. Of course, it was illegal to talk about it.
There's that part. Yes.
That part, you go to jail. Really, you go to jail. So that part. But I think unconsciously I assimilated that. And that is also, again, what made it easier and has made it easier for me to explore different traditions and put it inside of my mojo. I'm using our tech, but make it my gree-gree.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Now, there are a lot of conversations about how people do this, right? Particularly in my field of religious pluralism. And they say, you can't just go shopping for religion and grabbing what you want off the shelves, right? Now, whether or not people do, so it's odd to me to tell people they can't do something they're already doing, but there seems to be a kind of condemnation, right, of having an eclectic spirituality where you're taking a little bit from different traditions. Now, you over here, you get fully immersed in different traditions, right? So,
yes,
right, and you're like, I'm initiated Taoist. I'm initiated in these. So you're not quite grabbing off the shelf. You're like, no, I live in the store, and they're different stores, but they're all within reach of my house, perhaps.
Yes, because as I said earlier, that's natural. And it's also natural, as you know, I place a lot of emphasis upon the real tactile nature of ancestral respect and veneration. It's not abstract. I believe ancestors are in my bones. I believe ancestors have guided me to study different things, also because these are things that they wanted to study, but were not allowed to in different historical periods. So, for example, when I got the Ph.D., case in point, my grandmother, no formal education. One day she said, "Come here, I'm gonna take you out to dinner." And we got in the car and we drove up to Kentucky Fried Chicken at that time. Got out of the car, she's taking me to dinner. And so she got to the cash register and the young lady is getting ready to take the order. She said, "This is my grandson." And man, okay. Then she said, "Give him what he wants." Okay, maybe on. Then she said this, "He got a PhD." Now, it wasn't just about, that's just one instance. It wasn't just about me. It was a whole family, in a way of speaking. All the ancestry also were doing what I was doing with and through me in a particular. I always had that sense. So I never felt, again, conflicted. And I felt it was important to fully immerse myself in it. So for me, it's definitely not cherry picking. It is an expansion. I alluded to it a moment ago. It is expansion of the tradition of origin. My tradition, culture, spirituality of origin is hoodoo. It's not Ifa. It's not Vodun. It's not Presbyterianism. You hear how I'm making these distinctions. Although those components might be part of my ancestry in some way, the one that grounded me as a point of origin and that taught me, I guess unconsciously, the techniques of incorporation and of immersion is Hoodoo.
So amongst, right, these traditions that are all meaningful for you, and you just mentioned how important honoring ancestors is for you, which is shared across these traditions. Are there particular rituals or practices or like maybe I mean, I know you are a text person and we'll come back to that, but are there particular practices or rituals that are just personally meaningful to you? I mean, or like favorites? I don't know if you,
Yes, and
but
it's yes, and it also is a family tradition.
Mhm.
Dreaming,
Dream.
conscious dreaming. I have a ritual every night in which I prepare myself to go into what I call go into the deep.
Mhm.
I do a particular, and I've shared with others, a particular quote unquote inventory at
Mhm.
the end of the day to check in what my body is saying, to check in with what things I've done that I'd like to modify. I have a specific way in which I will quote unquote take a shower to cleanse myself. That's kind of like a little quasi baptism of residual things that I need to let go of physically, emotionally, mentally, spiritually. And then I have like my grandmother did, I have my chair that I sit in to meditate and set my intention for the evening,
Mhm.
intention for the night. And as I go to bed, whatever it might be that I want to accomplish, whatever that intention might be, I'll let that be the last thing that I think about consciously. And then as I sleep, I pay attention to what comes to me when I sleep. I pay attention to images that come to me. I don't try to interpret them, I pay attention to them. And then when I wake up in the morning, I'll do a corresponding ritual to set my tone for the day, taking insights from my dream rest time into the activities of the day. Most of the time, I do this a lot when I do presentations, I teach, etc. I do the first version of that while I'm sleeping. And then when I wake up, that's part two. Just like this conversation. I did this last night. Now we're doing it again. But let me say this too. This is important because um, from a certain ancestral tradition, I asked myself, what did our ancestors do when they were stripped of everything? There's no Puele, there's no Paifa, there's none of that in America. Let's just say that. There's just you.
Right.
Now what do? You go inside. So that's the analogy. Every night I go inside. And then there are other things I do, of course. I love to read. Um, I love languages. Um, I love esoteric studies, and each one has particular rituals. At the same time, as you said earlier, they're archetypal. So I work in that respect with the archetypal correspondences between the various rituals. Now, when I'm doing a specific, or I'm specifically focused on Ifa Sheshe, I do those rituals specifically. When I'm specifically focused on Haitian Vodun rituals, I do those, or whatever it is, magic. So I make distinctions, yes, for particular purposes and particular, for lack of a better way of saying, projects I'm working on. But I keep in mind, the key is me.
And so you have communities, I assume, right? You have
Yes,
a
yes,
Taoist community you hang out in, you have an EFOC community, like you got people, right? And
absolutely.
assuming they're different, like most of them aren't multi-religious, most of them are just whatever they are, right?
Mm-hmm.
Can you tell us more about that?
So this coming Sunday, I'm teaching this class now at Agnes Scott College here, Women's College you're familiar with, and it's on religions of Africa and the particular focus case studies Ifa Sheshe. And on this coming Sunday, the first Sunday of the month, we will have both an in-person and online gathering at Ile Ori. And I've invited students from the class to log on and experience, at least in terms of an online representation for them to experience what this service is like, and to help them have a kind of a better understanding of the things that I'm discussing with them. So that's a community that I'm involved with very specifically each month, and between the first Sundays. And the same thing is true with other groups that I have, Rosicrucian, Masonic groups. I meet and participate in those gatherings. And you asked a question about conflict or potential conflict. And what I experience is this, and this is true in general. Yes, there can be some difference of opinions, but I have experienced that I don't have conflict or disagreements or adversarial situations because I'm not pretending.
Mm.
And I say this especially to my seminary students when I was still actively teaching at the ITC. You cannot persuade other people to think or believe a particular way if you have not assimilated it yourself. Yeah. And if you have assimilated it, you don't have to prove it. It speaks for itself. And so people do understand that when I'm expressing my opinion, I'm not telling them what they should do. Right. I'm sharing what I have learned and acquired. And that's from my experience. That's why I don't have external tensions, because I don't have internal tension. This is what works for me. I'm in a good place. So if you want to know more about how as we're having this conversation, about how I have done that and am doing this is how. And I think that's really the word, is in a way of speaking. Whatever it is you're practicing, give yourself time to digest it so that it is natural for you and that the form of it is natural for you. I do not ascribe to any form of fundamentalism, Christian fundamentalism, or any other. No, I'm not a fundamentalist. So, to the extent that I believe, to the extent that a tradition is also has basic rubrics, to be sure, and is organic and relevant for the time in which it is emerging, the stronger and the better it will be.
I have so many questions, and I think I can get them all in.
Go ahead.
Right. You've talked about family and family first now, and how you were raised, but you also have children and grandchildren.
Yeah, and great grandchildren.
Great grandchildren.
Oh yeah, I'm
At
a
this young
grandpapa
age.
now.
At this young age.
Oh yeah, young age of 71. Yes.
How did you raise them? Right? Did you raise them multiply, or did it depend on when they were born and where you were at that time? Or
different phases of my life it's extraordinary. There were times when I was with my children. There were times when I wasn't with them. Their mothers and I went in different paths, but we remained friends. And their mothers, in many respects, were already open to, let's say, for example, new thought and aware of it long before I was. And here again, even though we had our differences, that is, our mothers and I, too, we had that same commitment about family. And so that made it easier for me to be in contact with my children. And also what's fascinating is that, as you now already know, I'm writing the second part, or part two, or however you want to think of it, to Travel Talk with my daughters. And because they, over the years, have developed in conversation with me and not in conversation with me, they developed their own spiritualities that are amazingly similar to what I've done and go beyond what I've done. For example, my eldest one has a spiritual healing center here in Atlanta, multi-dimensional focus on self-healing. And I'm helping her with that, but she's done a lot without my direct assistants until recently that I've become more immersed in what she's doing. My youngest daughter is the one who's written and created a whole oracle system on lucid dreaming, lucid living. Likewise, never had a constant contact with me, but follow her own intuition. And this is why I also believe that if we cultivate it, ancestral intelligence truly is intergenerational. Because a year ago, I had them on a Monday night webinar talking about their particular projects. And it was amazing for me, as well as the audience, participants, to hear them go back and forth, to hear them talk about complementarity, what they do, and I think also experience that they like each other. That piece, siblings with different mothers, still they like each other, because again, that whole notion of family first is if there is a law, that's the law.
Well, since you've mentioned law, I know you also hang with the New Thought people, right? I've
Yes,
seen you at Agape. You've taught for the Johnnie Colman Institute, and I know those two places in particular, very Black, but also have a sense of that they're universal spiritual laws,
yes.
right? That govern the universe or the multiverse. Do you, so in the midst of having these multiple traditions, do you also believe this? And is that the law? Is it family
So
first?
let me go back to that. That's interesting. The way that I was introduced to New Thought through Reverend Dr. Michael Bernard Beckwith was through an event that I actually had done for the late Bishop Carlton Pearson of blessed memory. And when I did the presentation in 2009 here in Atlanta, I knew nothing about New Thought. This is what really is extraordinary. Another good example. And everybody was coming up to me afterwards. Oh, they were just so excited. And at the same time, they were asking, "Who are you?" Nobody knows you. Where have you been? And I would chuckle. And
I was in the Presbyterian church, right?
yes, I've been. What I said was, I've been with me.
Yeah.
But here's the piece, Doc. As I began to look into New Thought, I realized that all the things that I had studied esoterically corresponded to it. So those years of studying Rosicrucianism, of studying Kabbalah, etc., were the components that corresponded to, of course, the Presbyterian, of course, the Pentecostal too. All of those at that particular convergence corresponded to New Thought. But I knew nothing about New Thought before that, consciously. But I did know this. As I did my research, I knew some of the same sources that the pioneers of New Thought knew. That piece. And that's why I began to teach actually on Monday nights, to help people better understand the sources behind New Thought, were sources I was very familiar with.
Now, this goes perfectly. You are a text person, right? You love yourself some text. Tell us about your love of languages, your love of text, which texts you play around in, and how you, right? I know you teach various ones, but tell us more about that, because you're saying we read the same things and we came to the same conclusions, right? So what is it that these progenitors, right, of a system we now call New Thought, and you, who was doing this in a different way, what are y'all reading?
So what they're reading, all the correspondences, there's an excellent book, for example, by someone who was entitled "Where Did He Get That?" Ruach is the last name, and what she does, she talks about the sources of Ernest Holmes' Science of Mind, and in doing that, she cites the biblical passages. She cites the influences of, let's say, esoteric scholars, practitioners in England and elsewhere. These were the same persons I studied. She cites persons in Rosicrucianism, Theosophy, the list just goes on. And these sources are sources that I myself had studied and had been practicing for years before I was introduced to New Thought. I would say that studying of all of them, Rosicrucianism is probably the most dominant one that corresponds to a source for new thought.
Now, can you tell us what that is? Many people
Okay.
probably haven't heard of that. They're like, Rosa, what? How do you spell that? Where did it come from? This
Google,
is
Google,
not in
Google,
my world
everybody.
religions class, right?
No, I know we didn't. Remember when I said earlier that I began to study the tarot cards?
Yeah.
Once I began to study the tarot cards, I came across the word Kabbalah spelled with a Q instead of a C, but a system of magic. And as I learned more about that and studied that, that's when I realized there were whole streams of tradition in Jewish, Christian, and you call it magical Kabbalah. These are systems of, you could say, mental meditation, systems of, you process theologian. They have components of that are similar to process theology about the supreme, quote unquote, ultimate being, the dialogical universe in which we live. I'm trying not to get too technical, but those convergences, especially at the turn of the 1890s, early 1900s, in France, Germany, England, and the United States, gave birth to a revival of esoteric studies and also a very strong focus on, for lack of a better way, on mentalism, the power of the mind, the correspondence between the microcosmic mind and the macrocosmic mind that pervades the universe. Positive thinking, new thought, mental manifestation, Kabbalion, on and on and on, were generated during that particular time period. And I'm saying that they were not the only source, but certainly a primary stream. And one rubric for that, to answer your question about the regular, one rubric for that would be persons who in Masonic and quasi-Masonic mystical traditions called themselves Rosicrucians, Fraternity of the Rosy Cross. Joy hand.
Thank you so much. You got a good lesson there.
Yeah. That's so much more, but that's I want to keep it.
Yeah, give us the 101, right?
Yeah, conversation.
I almost forgot my next question. Hold on. Oh, yes, I remember now. So you've talked about your roots being an African American hoodoo, right? And hoodoo is a really, really African American contextual tradition.
Thank you. Let me pause too, because you know this, but I want everybody else to know this too. We don't really speak of African American religions the same way that Westerners might understand, a Western thinking person might understand it. We really think of it as a culture or spirituality, or a culture that contains spirituality within it. So the religious aspect that I was born in was Christianity, but in a particular form of it. But the culture, the day-to-day experiences of my family and the more immediate community was one that would be called a hoodoo culture. And everybody knows that Memphis is a hub of hoodoo.
Right. So, many of the traditions you've talked about, maybe Taoism as a slight exception and Rosicrucianism, right, are just real Black traditions, right? Grounded in African and African diasporic communities and cultures. And you said that this job you had with the Presbyterian Church was about social justice. And, Black people, for obvious reasons, are always
Yes.
about freedom, about liberation, about
Yes.
justice. Can you tell us what your traditions are saying or how they fuel any kind of social justice? What does that have to say about freedom, about all of that?
I can say what I'm saying.
Well, yeah, I want to know what do you say? What do you say?
How I feel.
I'll take.
Yeah.
What do you say?
I say, because you asked me this question earlier. So I use the Bible as a template, case study and template for reframing how we understand it as an African originated text, and an African originated text based on the original landmass in which it is describing, based on the original demographics of most of the people in it, and based on the African Asiatic languages of Hebrew, Aramaic, and then Koine Greek, and Vulgar Latin. So with those three prongs of the template that I use, it gives me the power to encourage persons to revisit the text and to see it from a different vantage point than what it later on becomes through translations. And it also has helped me and in my teaching to see correspondences between the African origins of the Bible and quote unquote West African traditions like Ifa, like Vodou, like Mkhize in the Congo. When you see those correspondences, especially at the linguistic level, then it's easier to recognize how, in my case, I'm writing from right to left at 5 years old. I'm remembering something, or I'm trying to remember something. And here's the piece. Now, here's the real takeaway. When African descended people are allowed to remember, then we enhance our present engagement in liberation, our present engagement in freedom, our present engagement in justice. I will say this. I've said to some of my students on Monday nights regarding the current situation. African Americans have 400 years plus of dealing with disappointments, dealing with change, dealing with not just surviving, but thriving. We know exactly what to do. And we know what to do because we have ancestral intelligence about what to do. Now, for us, the various traditions that we can become more aware of, even prior to our venture here in the Americas, gives us more strength and encouragement as well. Knowing more, for example, about Ifa, knowing more about West African and Haitian Vodou, knowing more about who we were before we were, quote unquote, enslaved, gives us a longer trajectory and more resources from which to draw, so that we do not define ourselves, our point of origin, as here, but our point of origin is the originators of humanity. I'm preaching now, but that's, I'm a preacher.
Preaching on a preach.
Yeah, amen. You got to do it at some point.
So clearly, most Black people aren't walking around in the world with the same spiritual disposition that you have. How does that feel to you? Do you feel
feels good? That's another question. That feels good. I'm gonna tell you why. I've said it to my seminary students often. Mm-hmm. When you are in conversation with our people about what you're learning, remember you did not know this at all times. Remember this too. It is better to walk with them than to talk down to them. So when I do presentations, and I've done a number of them with churches, Baptist churches, etc., I don't just say these things, Doc. I show them what I'm talking about. And not only do I show them what I'm talking about, I show them how they too can begin to acquire even just the rudiments of Hebrew, Greek, etc. I show them that what we don't know is based on what has been hidden. And now we can uncover for ourselves what has been hidden. That's very different and much more receivable than saying, y'all don't know this, I do. Well, these are the same people who birthed you. That's the same person who said, that's my grandson. I don't even have a elementary school education, my grandmother, but now he has it. He has it. So the collaboration of walking with our people and wherever they are. When I go back to Memphis, I speak the language of Memphis. The language of my family.
That's your language too.
Yes, absolutely. It's my language of origin. It's my first tongue.
First language.
Mhm.
Well, you
And
suggest.
just so let me say another. I added to that. So even though we might not all speak the same language and have the same disposition, vis-a-vis the Bible, etc., nevertheless, there's a common thread and impulse we do have about freedom, what that looks like, and how, with different techniques, not only do we get there, we sustain it. And I'm going to say this because I said it Monday night. Nobody in my family is fretting about anything that's happening now. One, we know what to do. Two, most importantly, we know how to take care of each other because we acknowledge generations of doing that. And I think that's what's also significant, is not to become an existentialist, but to really take in the global understanding. For example, in Ifa's understanding of reincarnation, and the cultivation of Iwa, good character. You came here to make the world better than it was when you were here before. And you're here now to make it better, so it will be so when you come back. Because time is not only linear and progressive, it is cyclical, and you're a part of that. The ancestors are in you from the past, and if you live worldly enough with your children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, yay, you'll become an ancestor.
I mean, this is so helpful, and it's encouraging me, even as we're going forward in these days.
That's what the elders are supposed to do. That's why I'm retired. So
Right.
I get to reflect on this now globally.
Right. And my kid, and I don't know if you remember when you used to come by our place in California,
Yes,
um, that child would say, we don't have religion, Mom. This is our culture. And I was like, yes, okay,
that's
exactly.
it.
He's like,
No,
I don't know
exactly
about this religion nonsense you're talking. This is our culture, Mom.
right.
Right.
We don't have that which binds.
Yeah.
We have that which breeds spirituality, and that which cultivates and is cultivatable. That's why it's not static. Mm-hmm.
Now, you suggested this in the last talk about being in a Baptist church, but let's say we have listeners who are like, wow, this is amazing. I want to know more. Where do you think someone should start? Where do you recommend?
Monday night, I have an online, Monday night, I have an online Bible and meditation. That's the rubric.
Mhm.
Pro bono
Mhm.
sessions every Monday night, 8, basically log on 8:30 to 9:30 on different topics like this. That's all. I'm just.
And we'll tell people where to find
Oh
you.
yeah. Just send me an email.
Right.
To W Coleman, COLEMAN PhD 33 at gmail.com, and I'll add you to the roll, to the list. We have lots of fun too.
See, look how that goes. Right. You're like, I'm keeping it real simple.
Yeah. No, nothing complicated about that at all. The other place is check out my notifications, as I do put them there on my Facebook page, which is Will Coleman PhD.
Yeah, I'll link that in the show notes.
Thank you. Mm-hmm.
Now, I'm asking everyone, and especially I know you have been a teacher to so many people and a mentor to so many people. In fact, one of our previous guests talked about you as their mentor,
Well, who was that?
Darnice Martin.
Yes, indeed.
Yes,
New thought. Exactly right.
right. Talked
New
about
thought.
how much she learns from you. Well, I want to know who is your spiritual mentor? Who's been a teacher or mentor for you that's been meaningful in your own life? Right, because we all
Well,
need teachers. We all, we even with teachers, we need teachers. We
a
need.
blessed memory.
Mhm.
I would say my father, who just made transition almost 93 back in April, Willie
Mhm.
Coleman Sr. And my family is created a Deacon Coleman Polyglot School in his honor
Mm.
inside of my daughter's ministry. Then I would say, this is going to be funny, but this is true. My first year, at the end of my first year of graduate school, The professor at that time, this was in a seminar on Paul Tillich, asked me, because he was impressed, the same question, who was the theologian I admired the most? And I, and I was in all honesty, I said, well, I like Paul Tillich, we studied him, and I like Reinhold Niebuhr, etc. I said, but my favorite teacher is Alice Coleman, my grandmother.
Mm.
And they were shocked in a way of speaking, but it's absolutely true. Doc, it's my grandmother who taught me, my father's mother who taught me, who spoke with the Gullah Geechee, still from Alabama to Memphis. She still had that Gullah Geechee accent, inflection, syntax that made it so easy for me to read the slave narratives. And she told stories in ways that I adopted. She had, when I would interview her, she had a way of answering questions first. Well, I don't know anything about that. Then she would give you the answer in 2 or 3 different ways. So she was also teaching me how to brand what you say. So I would say that my first foremost teachers would be, again, family. My grandmother, my maternal grandmother, who was the matriarch, who really instilled in us the importance of family. Then I would say both my parents, my mother, my father, because they have taught me many things, not by direct instruction, but by what they allowed me and encouraged me to do. They would even say something, we don't know anything about that, but you keep going.
Yeah.
And then I would say they also have taught me and are teaching me. I'm 71 now, but obviously, if Dad made it to almost 93 and Mom was going to be 92 this weekend, they're teaching me how to live a long time. They're teaching me how to extend my life. So I study them in terms of how to live, or let's say it another way, how to find the rhythm that's right for you and do that. Now, more formally, in terms of initiations, of course, my Lord, of blessed memory also, Oba Ade Bolo Fatamise, who initiated me into Ifa She. And then my mambo, her first name is Sister Dorothy. I would say along the way, elementary school teachers, they inspired me to, and often it was the case that I would be excelling at a particular rate and they would say, keep going. Or classmates. So it's communal. There's no one particular person that I could pinpoint apart from the one I just mentioned. That would be Alice Coleman, my grandmother.
Well,
Great.
thank you so much for sharing. I feel like, we all want to know your family now, be a part
Yes,
of
you
your
all can be
family.
a part. That's another thing. My parents, on that part, my parents, they had 8 of us. And I mean, took care of all 8 of us. And still, we joke about it now. Probably reared half of the neighborhood on the street where they lived. It was the house of sanctuary. If you got put out of home because you were bad, just make it to that house at the corner of the street. And I don't mean just for a night or two. I mean, my dad bought groceries. They had an adoption program without the paperwork.
I
Mm-hmm.
love it.
So I'm saying that to say, you want to join our family? Okay. Monday nights.
Monday nights. Great.
Monday nights.
Well, we'll put all the information in the show notes. I thank you so much for sharing
Thank you.
both your knowledge and your personal experiences with our listeners.
It's
And
all the journey. It's
yeah,
all
we
the
can
journey.
all look forward to the next episode. I want you all to keep questioning, keep listening, keep learning, and keep breaking the rules of how religion is supposed to work.
Yes. All right, cuz. We'll see you around.
Thank you for joining us for another episode of Diverse Devotions, Black Belief Across Boundaries. I hope today's conversation has sparked something in you, whether it's a question, a new insight, or simply a deeper understanding of the many ways Black folk engage with spirituality and religion. Remember to check out the show notes for more resources. If you've enjoyed this episode, please subscribe or follow, rate, and share to help others discover the power of diverse religious experiences. We'd love to hear from you, so leave a comment or send us a message about your thoughts and experiences at diversedevotions.com. Until next time, keep questioning, keep seeking, and keep breaking the rules of how faith is supposed to work.